Before we begin, take a moment to settle in, adjust your pillow, dim the lights, and let your mind slow down. If you enjoy calm history told in a relaxing way, make sure to follow or subscribe so you can return for more peaceful journeys through the past. And if this gentle exploration helps you drift towards sleep, share it with someone who loves quiet history as much as you do. Now, take a slow breath and let's begin. Long ago, in the eastern half of the old Roman world, a civilization quietly carried forward the legacy of Rome for more than 1,000 years. Today we call it the Byzantine Empire. But the people who lived there never called themselves Byzantines. To them, they were simply Romans. Their empire was the continuation of Rome itself, even though the city of Rome was far away and their capital stood on the shimmering shores of the Bosporus. That capital was Constantinople. Imagine a city resting between two continents. To one side lay Europe, to the other, Asia. Ships passed through its waters every day, carrying silk, spices, grain, and stories from distant lands. Walls of stone surrounded the city, tall and strong, protecting it like a quiet guardian watching over centuries. Constantinople was founded in the year 330 by the Roman Emperor Constantine the Great. He chose the site carefully. It had already been a small Greek city called Byzantium, but Constantine saw its potential. From that moment on, the city would grow into one of the most important places in the world. The emperor renamed it Constantinople, meaning the city of Constantine. For centuries afterward, travelers approaching the city by sea described the same unforgettable sight. Golden sunlight reflecting off domes and towers, massive walls stretching across the land, churches rising above crowded streets, the harbor filled with ships from every corner of the known world. Inside those walls lived hundreds of thousands of people. Merchants called out their goods in busy markets. Scholars studied ancient texts preserved from Greek and Roman traditions. Craftsmen shaped glass, metal, and silk into beautiful objects that would travel far beyond the empire. At the center of the city stood one of the most extraordinary buildings ever constructed, the Hagia Sophia. Its name means holy wisdom, and when it was completed in the year 537, it became the largest cathedral in the world. The Emperor Justinian, who ordered its construction, is said to have walked inside and whispered with awe, "Solomon, I have surpassed you." The vast dome seemed to float above the air like a golden sky. Light streamed through its windows, reflecting off mosaics made from tiny pieces of colored glass and gold. For people entering the building, it must have felt like stepping into another world. The Byzantine Empire was unique in many ways. It blended Roman law, Greek culture, and Christian faith into something entirely its own. Latin had once been the language of Roman administration, but over time, Greek became the dominant language of the empire. Philosophers wrote in Greek, officials governed in Greek. Even ordinary conversations in markets and homes gradually shifted toward Greek speech. Yet, despite these cultural changes, the Byzantines always believed they were part of the Roman story. Their emperors ruled from Constantinople, just as Roman emperors once ruled from Rome. Their armies marched under Roman traditions. Their legal system still carried the foundations laid by earlier Roman lawmakers. In fact, one of the most important legal achievements of the Byzantine world happened during the reign of Emperor Justinian in the 6th century. Justinian ordered the creation of a massive collection of Roman laws. Scholars gathered centuries of legal writings and organized them into a single system known today as the Corpus Juris Civilis, or the body of civil law. This work would later influence legal systems across Europe for hundreds of years. But the Byzantine Empire was not only about law and administration, it was also a world of art, faith, and ceremony. Religion played a central role in daily life. Church bells echoed through the streets. Monks copied manuscripts by candlelight. Pilgrims traveled great distances to visit holy sites. Festivals filled the city with color, music, and processions. The emperor himself was seen as chosen by God to rule. His palace ceremonies were filled with elaborate rituals meant to show both political power and divine blessing. Visitors often describe these ceremonies as dazzling. Golden thrones, silk robes embroidered with jewels, mechanical birds that sang in palace halls, bronze lions that appeared to roar when ambassadors entered the emperor's presence. These displays were not simply decoration. They were carefully designed to inspire awe and remind visitors that the Byzantine Empire was one of the most powerful states on earth. Beyond Constantinople stretched a vast and varied landscape. At different times in its history, the empire included parts of Greece, Turkey, Egypt, Syria, Italy, and North Africa. Its borders shifted constantly as wars, alliances, and migrations reshaped the map. Along those borders stood fortresses, mountain passes, and watchtowers guarding the empire's edges. Soldiers known as the Byzantine army defended these lands. They were famous for their discipline, strategy, and adaptability. One of the empire's most mysterious weapons was something called Greek fire. Greek fire was a powerful liquid that could burn even on water. When sprayed from tubes mounted on ships, it created terrifying streams of flame that enemies struggled to extinguish. The exact formula for Greek fire remains unknown even today. Historians still debate what ingredients were used because the Byzantines guarded the secret very carefully. Their enemies feared it, their allies marveled at it, and it helped protect Constantinople during several major sieges. Life in the Byzantine Empire was not always peaceful, however. Political intrigue often filled the imperial court. Emperors rose to power through inheritance, military victories, or sometimes unexpected circumstances. Some rulers governed for decades. Others lasted only months. The empire saw wise leaders, ruthless generals, devoted reformers, and ambitious usurpers. Each left their mark on the long history of Byzantium, and that history stretched far longer than many people realize. The Western Roman Empire officially fell in the year 476, but the eastern half, the Byzantine Empire, continued for nearly another 1,000 years. Through wars, plagues, revolutions, and cultural transformations, it endured. It preserved ancient knowledge that might otherwise have been lost. It connected trade routes between Europe and Asia, and it acted as a bridge between the classical world and the medieval one. Tonight, as you slowly drift through these quiet stories, we'll explore hundreds of gentle and fascinating details about this remarkable empire. Small moments from everyday life, strange traditions, unexpected inventions, peaceful scenes from monasteries and markets, and the long, slow rhythm of a civilization that lasted for more than a millennium. So close your eyes if you'd like, let your breathing slow, and allow the distant world of the Byzantine Empire to unfold quietly in your imagination. And if you find yourself enjoying this calm journey through history, remember to follow or subscribe so you don't miss the rest of the story. There are many more peaceful moments from Byzantium waiting ahead. Before we continue our quiet journey into the world of the Byzantine Empire, take another slow breath and allow your body to relax a little deeper into the bed or chair beneath you. If you enjoy these calm explorations of history, consider following or subscribing so you can return anytime for more peaceful stories from the past. And now, let us gently continue. Imagine the early morning in Constantinople. The sun slowly rises over the Bosporus and soft light spreads across the water. Fishing boats drift quietly along the harbor while merchants begin preparing their stalls in the markets. The city is waking, but not in a rush. There is a steady rhythm to life here, shaped by centuries of tradition. Constantinople was one of the largest cities in the medieval world. At times, nearly 500,000 people lived within its walls. That number was astonishing for its time. Many cities in Europe were much smaller, yet Constantinople remained a bustling center of activity, culture, and trade. One reason for this was its location. The city stood at a natural crossroads between continents. Goods traveling from Asia into Europe often passed through its ports. Silk from China, spices from India, precious stones, perfumes, ivory, and rare fabrics from distant lands. The markets of Constantinople reflected this global connection. If you walked through the streets near the harbor, you might hear dozens of languages being spoken: Greek, Latin, Arabic, Armenian, Slavic dialects, and many others blended together like the hum of a living tapestry. Merchants displayed colorful fabrics that shimmered in the sunlight. Spices filled the air with warm scents of cinnamon and pepper. Jewelry crafted from gold and enamel sparkled inside wooden stalls. But among all these goods, one material held special importance in the Byzantine world: silk. For centuries, silk was one of the most valuable products in the empire. Originally, it came from China, a long trade routes known today as the Silk Road. But eventually, something remarkable happened. According to an old story, 2 monks traveled to China and secretly learned the method of silk production. When they returned to the Byzantine Empire, they carried silkworm eggs hidden inside hollow bamboo sticks. With this knowledge, the Byzantines began producing silk themselves. Imperial workshops carefully guarded the process. Silk became a symbol of wealth and power. Only certain members of society were allowed to wear specific colors or patterns made from this luxurious fabric. Deep purple silk, in particular, was associated with the imperial family. In fact, Byzantine emperors were sometimes called born in the purple. This phrase referred to children born inside a special purple chamber in the imperial palace. It symbolized their legitimate connection to the throne. The imperial palace itself was enormous. It stood beside the hippodrome and overlooked the sea. Within its walls were gardens, courtyards, halls of marble, fountains, and private chapels. Generations of emperors lived and ruled there, each adding new sections to the sprawling complex. Nearby stood one of the most exciting places in the city, the Hippodrome. The Hippodrome was a massive stadium used for chariot racing. It could hold tens of thousands of spectators. Crowds gathered there to watch thrilling races as teams of horses pulled chariots around the track at incredible speeds. The atmosphere during these races was intense. Fans supported different teams, mainly the Blues and the Greens. These factions were more than just sports teams. They became social and political groups that influenced life in the city. Supporters cheered loudly, waving banners and shouting encouragement as chariots thundered around the curved track. Sometimes the excitement turned into chaos. On rare occasions, rival groups clashed violently. The most famous example happened during the Nika riots in the year 532, when tensions between factions erupted into a massive uprising. Large parts of the city were damaged before the rebellion was finally suppressed. But despite these moments of unrest, the Hippodrome remained a beloved gathering place for centuries. It was where people from many different backgrounds came together to share excitement, celebration, and spectacle. Life in the empire extended far beyond the capital, of course. Across the countryside, farmers worked fertile lands, growing wheat, olives, grapes, and vegetables. Villages dotted the hills and valleys of the empire's provinces. Agriculture was essential for feeding the large population of Constantinople. Grain shipments regularly arrived by ship from regions like Egypt and the Black Sea. These deliveries helped ensure that bread remained available in the capital's bakeries. Bread was one of the most common foods eaten by Byzantine citizens. People often enjoyed it with olive oil, cheese, fish, vegetables, or honey. Wealthier households might add meats, exotic spices, or sweet pastries to their meals. But even simple food could be satisfying after a long day's work. In homes across the empire, families gathered around shared tables. Oil lamps flickered gently against the walls, while conversations flowed quietly into the evening. Education also held an important place in Byzantine society. Children in wealthier families often attended schools where they studied reading, writing, mathematics, philosophy, and classical literature. The works of ancient Greek authors like Homer and Plato continued to be read and discussed. This preservation of knowledge became one of the empire's greatest contributions to history. While much of Western Europe went through periods where classical texts became rare, Byzantine scholars carefully copied and protected ancient manuscripts. Monasteries and libraries kept these writings alive through generations. Many of these preserved works would later inspire scholars during the Renaissance centuries later. Art flourished as well. Byzantine artists developed a distinctive style, known for its rich colors, symbolic imagery, and shimmering gold backgrounds. Instead of focusing on realistic perspective, their art aimed to create a spiritual atmosphere. Icons became especially important. Icons were sacred images of Christ, the Virgin Mary, or various saints. Believers often prayed before these images, seeing them as windows into the divine world. The creation of icons followed careful traditions passed down from master artists. Pigments were mixed carefully. Gold leaf was applied with delicate precision. Each brushstroke carried both artistic skill and spiritual meaning. These images decorated churches, homes, and monasteries across the empire. But Byzantine history also included moments of debate and disagreement about icons. During a period known as the Archaeo-iconoclast controversy, some emperors believed religious images should be removed or destroyed. They feared that people were worshipping the images themselves rather than what they represented. For more than a century, arguments about icons divided the empire. Eventually, the use of icons was restored, and they remained central to Byzantine worship. Through all these centuries, Constantinople continued to shine as one of the most extraordinary cities in the world. Its walls protected it, its markets enriched it, its churches inspired it, and its scholars preserved knowledge that might otherwise have disappeared. Tonight we are only beginning to explore the quiet details of this fascinating civilization. There are still countless peaceful stories waiting ahead, stories of emperors and monks, travelers and traders, inventions and traditions. So allow your mind to drift gently with these echoes of the past. And if this relaxing journey through the Byzantine world is helping you unwind, remember to follow or subscribe so you can return for the next part of our calm historical exploration. Before we continue, take another slow, gentle breath. Let the quiet rhythm of the story carry you further into relaxation. If you're enjoying this calm journey through history, consider following or subscribing so you can return for the next peaceful chapters. There are many more quiet stories from the Byzantine world waiting ahead. Now, let's continue. As evening settled over Constantinople, the city transformed. The busy noise of markets slowly faded, and warm golden light began to glow from thousands of oil lamps placed in homes, workshops, and along the streets. The smell of baked bread, roasted fish, and spiced wine drifted through narrow stone alleys. People returned home after long days of work. Some lived in modest wooden houses tucked between larger stone buildings. Others lived in multi-story apartment blocks known as insulae, similar to those found in ancient Rome. These buildings housed many families, stacked one above another, creating small communities within the larger city. From open windows came quiet conversations, laughter, and the clinking of pottery dishes. Daily life in the Byzantine Empire often followed familiar rhythms that changed little from year to year. People woke with the rising sun, worked through the daylight hours, and gathered with family in the evenings. But the city itself was never completely silent. Constantinople was alive at all hours. Ships continued arriving in the harbor, guards patrolled the walls, monks prayed late into the night inside candlelit monasteries. And somewhere in the distance, church bells sometimes echoed softly through the darkness. Religion shaped nearly every aspect of Byzantine life. Christianity was deeply woven into the empire's identity. Churches stood in almost every district, and religious holidays filled the calendar throughout the year. Some festivals lasted several days. During these celebrations, processions moved through the streets, carrying candles, icons, and banners. Priests chanted prayers while crowds followed quietly behind. Incense floated through the air, creating a calm and reflective atmosphere. Many Byzantine churches were decorated with stunning mosaics. These mosaics were made from thousands of tiny pieces of colored stone, glass, or gold called tesserae. When light struck them, the images seemed to glow from within. Scenes of Christ, saints, angels, and biblical stories covered walls and domes. The figures often had large, thoughtful eyes and calm expressions that seemed to watch over the faithful. To Byzantine worshippers, these images were not just decoration. They were reminders of a spiritual world that existed beyond everyday life. Monasteries also played an important role across the empire. Hidden in mountains, forests, or along quiet coastlines, these communities were home to monks who dedicated their lives to prayer, study, and simple living. Their days followed structured routines that rarely changed. They woke before sunrise. They prayed together in dimly lit chapels. They copied manuscripts by hand, carefully preserving sacred texts and ancient writings. Some monks also worked in gardens, growing vegetables and herbs. Others brewed medicines from plants gathered in the surrounding countryside. The quiet discipline of monastic life attracted many people who wanted to devote themselves fully to faith and reflection. And within the peaceful walls of monasteries, knowledge quietly survived through the centuries. Monks patiently copied books that might otherwise have disappeared forever. Greek philosophy, Roman history, poetry, mathematics, and medicine were all preserved through their careful work. Each page required patience. Ink had to be mixed properly. Quills had to be sharpened. Letters were written slowly and precisely on parchment made from animal skin. Sometimes decorative artwork was added to the pages. These illuminated manuscripts contained colorful borders, delicate illustrations, and intricate designs made with gold leaf. When finished, the books were stored in monastery libraries or sent to churches and scholars who needed them. Meanwhile, outside the monasteries, the empire continued to face challenges along its borders. The Byzantine world was surrounded by many different peoples and kingdoms. Persians, Arabs, Bulgars, Slavs, and later the Vikings all encountered the empire in different ways. Some came as traders, others came as enemies. To protect its lands, the empire developed one of the most organized military systems of the medieval world. Soldiers were often stationed in regions known as themes. These were military districts where soldiers also lived as farmers. In exchange for land, they were expected to defend the empire when needed. This system helped maintain a large defensive force without requiring a massive standing army in the capital. Byzantine generals were also known for their strategic thinking. Rather than rushing into battle, they often preferred diplomacy, alliances, and careful planning. Sometimes they even paid rival groups to fight each other instead of attacking the empire. This patient approach allowed Byzantium to survive many dangerous moments throughout its long history. Still, the greatest protection for Constantinople remained its incredible walls. The Theodosian walls were among the strongest defensive structures ever built in the ancient world. They stretched across the land side of the city for several miles. But these were not just single walls. They were a complex system of defenses. First came a wide moat, then an outer wall, then a massive inner wall rising high above the ground, reinforced with towers placed at regular intervals. Enemy armies often looked at these defenses and realized that capturing Constantinople would be extremely difficult. And for centuries, they were right. Many powerful forces tried to take the city, but the walls held firm again and again. Beyond warfare and religion, the Byzantine Empire also developed remarkable achievements in engineering and daily life. Water systems brought fresh water into Constantinople through long aqueducts. Underground cisterns stored enormous quantities of water to supply the population during sieges or droughts. One of the most impressive of these was the Basilica cistern. Hidden beneath the city streets, this vast underground reservoir was supported by hundreds of stone columns rising from the water like silent guardians in the darkness. Visitors walking through it today still describe the quiet echo of dripping water and the mysterious atmosphere beneath the ancient ceiling. Public baths also remained an important part of city life, continuing a Roman tradition that had existed for centuries. People visited baths not only to wash, but also to relax, talk, and socialize. Warm steam filled the rooms while conversations drifted through the halls. In many ways, Byzantine society carried forward the traditions of the ancient Roman world while slowly transforming into something new. Greek culture became stronger. Christian traditions deepened. Art and architecture developed distinctive styles that would influence many regions around the Mediterranean. And through it all, Constantinople remained the shining center of this long-lasting civilization. Tonight, we've wandered through quiet streets, peaceful monasteries, glowing churches, and the massive walls that protected the empire's heart. But there are still many gentle stories waiting to be told. Stories of unusual inventions, stories of travelers who arrived from distant lands, stories of emperors whose decisions shaped centuries of history. So let your mind drift deeper into the calm rhythm of this journey. And if you're enjoying these relaxing stories from the Byzantine Empire, remember to follow or subscribe so you can return for the next peaceful chapter in our long, quiet exploration of the past. Before we continue our quiet journey through the world of the Byzantine Empire, take another slow breath. Let the rhythm of the story remain gentle and steady. If these calm historical moments are helping you relax, consider following or subscribing so you can return for the next peaceful chapters of this long journey through the past. Now, let us continue. In the early morning light of Constantinople, long before the markets filled with voices and footsteps, another quiet world was already awake. Bakeries. Inside small stone buildings along the city streets, bakers had begun their work while the sky was still dark. Fires burned inside clay ovens, warming the rooms with soft orange light. Dough rested on wooden tables, carefully shaped into loaves that would soon feed the waking city. Bread was one of the most important foods in the Byzantine Empire. For many people, it was eaten at nearly every meal. Bakers produced different kinds of bread depending on ingredients and wealth. Some loaves were simple and coarse, made with barley or mixed grains. Others were soft wheat bread, lighter and more expensive. When the ovens opened, the smell drifted through the streets, warm, comforting, familiar. Soon customers arrived carrying baskets or cloth bags. They greeted the bakers, exchanged a few quiet words, and carried fresh bread home to their families. Not far away, another group of workers was beginning their day. The fishermen. Along the shores of the Bosporus and the Golden Horn, small boats moved slowly across the water. Fishermen cast nets into the sea, hoping to bring back enough fish for the markets. Fish was a common part of the Byzantine diet. Fresh fish, salted fish, and dried fish were all sold throughout the city. Some were grilled over open fires. Others were preserved with salt and stored for later use. The sea surrounding Constantinople provided a constant source of food, and the harbor itself was always busy. Merchant ships from distant lands arrived regularly. Their sails appeared on the horizon like pale shapes against the morning sky. As they approached the harbor, dock workers prepared ropes and wooden rams to unload cargo. These ships carried goods from places many Byzantines would never see. Silks from the east, spices from Arabia, furs from northern forests, ivory from Africa, wine and olive oil from Mediterranean islands. Constantinople was not just a city, it was a meeting place for the world. Traders arriving there brought not only goods, but also stories. News traveled slowly in the medieval world, but ports like Constantinople became places where travelers exchanged information. Someone might speak of a distant kingdom. Another might describe strange animals seen on faraway journeys. Others carried rumors of wars, discoveries, or newly opened trade routes. In quiet taverns and busy marketplaces, these stories passed from voice to voice. Meanwhile, deeper inside the city stood the workshops of skilled craftsmen. Byzantine artisans were known for their remarkable skill. Goldsmiths shaped delicate jewelry from precious metals. Glassmakers created colorful vessels and windows. Metalworkers crafted armor, tools, and decorative objects. But one group of craftsmen held a particularly important role: the mosaic artists. Inside churches across the empire, mosaic artists worked patiently on towering walls and curved domes. Their task required extraordinary attention to detail. Each tiny tile had to be placed carefully into wet plaster. Thousands upon thousands of pieces formed a single image. Gold glass pieces reflected light from candles and windows, giving the impression that the figures themselves were glowing softly in the dim interiors. Sometimes these projects took years to complete, but the results could last for centuries. Even today, many Byzantine mosaics still shine with their original beauty. Another important part of Byzantine life was education. While not everyone attended school, learning was valued in many parts of society. Children in wealthier families often studied under private teachers or attended schools attached to churches. Students learned to read and write Greek. They studied classical literature, including the works of Homer and other ancient authors. They also learned rhetoric, the art of persuasive speaking, which was considered a valuable skill for public life. Mathematics, philosophy, and astronomy were also taught. Some students eventually continued their studies in higher schools located in Constantinople itself. These centers of learning helped preserve knowledge that stretched all the way back to ancient Greece and Rome, and this knowledge sometimes led to fascinating discoveries and inventions. For example, Byzantine scholars studied medicine carefully. Doctors learned from both ancient texts and their own observations. Hospitals existed in some Byzantine cities, often connected to monasteries. These institutions provided care for the sick and injured, something relatively rare in many parts of the medieval world. Doctors treated patients with herbal medicines, diet changes, and basic surgical procedures. While medical knowledge was limited compared to modern science, Byzantine physicians made important contributions to the history of medicine. The empire also developed clever engineering solutions. Bridges connected difficult terrain. Roads linked distant cities. Aqueducts transported water across valleys and hills. And inside Constantinople itself, the city's infrastructure was remarkably advanced. Water flowed through underground channels. Large cisterns stored water during times of need. Public fountains allowed residents to collect clean drinking water. These systems required constant maintenance, and specialized workers were responsible for keeping them functioning properly. Even the imperial palace had complex mechanisms designed to impress visitors. Some rooms reportedly contained mechanical devices powered by hidden systems of pipes and weights. Artificial birds sang from golden trees. Thrones slowly rose into the air during ceremonies. Whether every story about these devices is completely true remains uncertain, but many historical visitors wrote about them with amazement. Such displays were meant to demonstrate the wealth and sophistication of the Byzantine court. For foreign ambassadors arriving from distant lands, these ceremonies created a powerful impression. They entered grand halls filled with marble columns and glittering decorations. Silk curtains moved softly in the air. Golden lamps illuminated the room, and at the far end sat the emperor, surrounded by symbols of imperial authority. For the Byzantines, these rituals reinforced the idea that their empire was the rightful continuation of Rome. Even as centuries passed and the world changed around them, they believed their civilization remained a center of order and tradition. Yet life within the empire was not only about grand ceremonies or political power. Most people lived simple lives focused on family, work, and community. Children played in courtyards. Farmers tended their fields in distant provinces. Sailors navigated the seas. Monks prayed quietly in remote monasteries. Each of these lives formed part of the vast mosaic of Byzantine society. Just like the tiny tiles used by artists to create great works of art, each person contributed a small piece to the empire's long story. And tonight, as we continue our slow journey through these quiet details of the Byzantine world, there are still many more peaceful stories waiting ahead. Stories of unusual customs, stories of unexpected inventions, stories of distant travelers who passed through Constantinople's gates. So let your mind drift gently with the calm flow of history. And if these relaxing moments from the Byzantine Empire are helping you unwind, remember to follow or subscribe so you can return for the next chapter of our peaceful exploration through one of history's most fascinating civilizations. Before we continue our quiet journey through the Byzantine Empire, take another slow breath. Let the calm rhythm of the story settle your thoughts. If these peaceful moments of history help you relax, consider following or subscribing so you can return for the next parts of this long and gentle exploration. Now, let us continue. Beyond the towering walls of Constantinople stretched the vast countryside of the Byzantine world. Rolling hills, fertile plains, mountain valleys, and coastal villages formed the landscape where millions of people lived their everyday lives. While the capital was filled with grand buildings and busy markets, most Byzantines lived far from the imperial palace. Their lives followed the rhythm of nature. Farmers woke early in the morning, often before sunrise. Roosters crowed in village courtyards as the first light of dawn spread across the fields. The air was cool and quiet, broken only by the sounds of animals stirring and tools being prepared for their day's work. Agriculture was the foundation of the empire's economy. Fields of wheat stretched across the countryside, especially in fertile regions such as Anatolia and parts of Greece. Wheat was one of the most important crops because it produced flour for bread, the daily staple of Byzantine meals. But farmers grew many other crops as well. Olive trees covered sunny hillsides, their silver-green leaves shimmering softly in the wind. From these trees came olives and olive oil, both essential in Byzantine cooking. Grapevines climbed wooden supports across vineyards. In late summer and early autumn, families gathered to harvest the grapes. Some were eaten fresh, while others were pressed to make wine. Wine was widely consumed throughout the empire. Sometimes it was mixed with water or flavored with herbs and spices. It appeared at both simple meals and grand banquets. Vegetable gardens also surrounded many homes and villages. People grew onions, garlic, beans, cabbage, lentils, and herbs. These foods formed the foundation of many everyday dishes. Meals in Byzantine households were often simple but nourishing. A typical meal might include bread dipped in olive oil, vegetables cooked in clay pots, fish from nearby rivers or seas, and occasionally cheese made from sheep or goat milk. For wealthier families, meals could be more elaborate. Roasted meats, sweet pastries filled with honey, and exotic spices from distant lands sometimes appeared on their tables. But regardless of wealth, sharing food remained an important part of daily life. Families gathered around low tables or mats, talking quietly about the day's work, the weather, and news from nearby towns. Meanwhile, throughout the countryside, monasteries often stood as peaceful centers of learning and prayer. Some were built high on hills or tucked into quiet valleys where monks could live in solitude. Others were closer to villages and towns, offering spiritual guidance to the surrounding communities. Monasteries often owned farmland as well. Monks cultivated gardens, orchards, and vineyards. They raised animals and produced their own food. Their lives were structured around prayer, work, and study. The day in a monastery was carefully organized. Before sunrise, monks gathered for their first prayers of the day. Their voices echoed softly through candlelit chapels, while the outside world was still dark and silent. Afterward, they returned to their tasks. Some worked in the fields, others copied manuscripts in quiet scriptoria, others prepared food, brewed herbal medicines, or maintained the monastery buildings. Life moved slowly in these peaceful communities. Time was marked not by clocks, but by the cycle of prayers, meals, and the rising and setting of the sun. Monasteries also became important centers of hospitality. Travelers crossing long distances often stopped at monasteries for rest. Pilgrims on religious journeys were welcomed with simple meals and a place to sleep. In a world where travel could be difficult and dangerous, such hospitality was deeply valued. Travel itself played an important role in the Byzantine Empire. Merchants, soldiers, pilgrims, scholars, and messengers constantly moved along roads and sea routes that connected distant regions of the empire. Roman roads, built centuries earlier, were still in use. Stone pathways stretched across mountains and valleys, linking cities and towns. Some of these roads were maintained carefully by imperial authorities to ensure safe travel for trade and communication. Travelers often stayed at roadside inns, known as hostels or caravanserais. These places provided shelter for both people and animals. Merchants might gather there in the evening, sharing food and stories after long days of travel. Conversations drifted through the air. Someone might describe a distant city they had visited. Another traveler might speak about a new ruler in a neighboring land. Others exchanged practical advice about safe routes and dangerous areas. In this way, information slowly spread across the Byzantine world. News did not travel instantly, as it does today. Sometimes it took weeks or even months for messages to reach distant provinces. Yet the empire developed a system of messengers and relay stations to help deliver important communications more quickly. Imperial couriers carried official letters between cities. These riders changed horses at designated stations along the roads, allowing them to travel long distances more efficiently. Through this network, orders from the emperor could reach distant governors, military commanders, or administrators. Meanwhile, ships continued to sail across the Mediterranean and the Black Sea. Byzantine sailors navigated coastal waters using knowledge passed down through generations. They watched the stars at night and studied winds and currents during the day. Ports throughout the empire welcomed these ships. Cities like Thessaloniki, Trebizond, and Antioch became important centers of commerce and cultural exchange. Each port had its own unique atmosphere. Some were bustling with international trade, others were quieter fishing communities where daily life moved at a slower pace. Yet all of them contributed to the complex network that connected the Byzantine world. Back in Constantinople, the capital continued to thrive as the empire's heart. Its walls stood strong, its markets remained full of goods and voices, its churches glowed softly with candles and golden mosaics, and through centuries of change, the Byzantine Empire continued adapting to new challenges and opportunities. Tonight, we've wandered beyond the city walls into the countryside, vineyards, monasteries, and long roads that connected distant lands. But our peaceful journey is far from finished. There are still many fascinating and calming details waiting to be explored. Stories about emperors and inventors, stories about scholars and sailors, stories about the quiet traditions that shaped everyday life across the Byzantine world. So allow your mind to drift deeper into this slow river of history. And if these relaxing stories from the Byzantine Empire are helping you unwind or fall asleep, remember to follow or subscribe so you can return for the next peaceful chapter in our long journey through one of history's most enduring civilizations. Before we continue, take another slow and gentle breath. Let your shoulders relax and allow the quiet rhythm of the story to carry you a little deeper into calm. If you enjoy these peaceful journeys through history, consider following or subscribing so you can return anytime for more relaxing stories from the past. Now, let us continue our journey through the Byzantine world. As the Byzantine Empire grew and changed across the centuries, its rulers faced an important task. They had to govern a vast and diverse land. From the mountains of Anatolia to the shores of the Mediterranean, and from the Balkan valleys to the deserts of the Middle East, many different cultures, languages, and traditions existed within the empire's borders. Managing such a large realm required careful organization. At the center of this system stood the emperor. The Byzantine emperor was not simply a political leader. In many ways, he was seen as both a ruler and a sacred figure, chosen to guide the empire under God's protection. His responsibilities were enormous. He commanded the armies, he oversaw the laws of the empire, he influenced religious affairs, and he represented the unity of the Byzantine world. But even emperors could not govern alone. Surrounding the emperor was a complex system of officials, advisors, and administrators who helped manage the daily functions of the state. These officials worked in large, administrative departments, often called bureaus. Each bureau had a specific role. Some handled taxes, others oversaw the military, some managed foreign diplomacy, others organized the supply of food and resources for the capital. The Byzantine government became famous for its detailed record keeping. Documents were carefully written, copied, and stored. Laws, orders, and agreements were recorded on parchment and preserved in archives. This careful administration helped the empire remain organized, even during times of crisis. One of the most important responsibilities of the Byzantine state was collecting taxes. Taxes funded the army, the navy, public works, and the functioning of the government itself. Most taxes were based on land. Farmers paid a portion of their agricultural production or income to support the state. These payments helped ensure that soldiers were equipped and cities were maintained. While taxation could sometimes be difficult for citizens, it allowed the empire to maintain its powerful institutions. The Byzantine army, for example, became one of the most disciplined forces of the medieval world. Byzantine soldiers trained carefully and followed organized strategies developed over centuries of experience. Military manuals were written to guide commanders. These manuals explained battlefield formations, defensive strategies, and methods of dealing with different enemies. The Byzantines often preferred patience over reckless attack. They studied their opponents carefully and used diplomacy whenever possible. Sometimes they even avoided battle entirely by negotiating alliances or offering payments to potential enemies. This strategic flexibility allowed the empire to survive many dangerous threats. And threats came often. Throughout its long history, the Byzantine Empire faced invasions from many directions. Persian armies challenged them in the east. Arab forces expanded across the Middle East and North Africa. Slavic and Bulgar groups moved into the Balkan regions. Later, new powers such as the Seljuk Turks appeared along the empire's eastern borders. Yet, time after time, the Byzantines adapted. They strengthened their defenses, they reorganized their military. They used diplomacy to build alliances when needed. Their capital city, Constantinople, remained the strongest fortress of the empire. Its massive walls, combined with its strategic location between land and sea, made it incredibly difficult to conquer. Ships attempting to attack the harbor often faced a surprising obstacle: a massive iron chain. This enormous chain could be stretched across the entrance of the Golden Horn, the city's protected harbor. When raised into position, it prevented enemy ships from sailing inside. Combined with powerful naval defenses, this chain helped protect Constantinople from many naval attacks. The Byzantine navy itself was highly respected. Warships, known as dromons, patrolled the seas. These ships were fast and maneuverable, equipped with rows of oars and sails that allowed them to travel long distances. Some of these ships carried one of the empire's most mysterious weapons: Greek fire. When launched from special tubes mounted on the ships, this burning substance could ignite enemy vessels even on the surface of water. Its flames were difficult to extinguish and often caused panic among opposing fleets. The secret formula for Greek fire was guarded carefully by the Byzantine state. Only a small group of trusted specialists knew how to produce it. Even today, historians remain uncertain about its exact ingredients. Beyond military strength, the Byzantine Empire also relied heavily on diplomacy. Byzantine diplomats traveled across Europe, Asia, and the Middle East to build relationships with other rulers. They brought gifts of silk, gold, and fine craftsmanship. They arranged marriages between royal families. They negotiated treaties designed to maintain peace whenever possible. This diplomatic approach sometimes allowed the empire to avoid costly wars. Foreign visitors often found the Byzantine court both fascinating and mysterious. Ambassadors arriving in Constantinople were welcomed with elaborate ceremonies designed to impress them. They entered halls decorated with marble floors and golden mosaics. They saw mechanical devices that moved silently behind the scenes. Some reported seeing golden trees with artificial birds that sang. Others described bronze lions that seemed to roar when visitors approached the throne. Whether these devices worked exactly as described remains debated. But their purpose was clear. They demonstrated the wealth, intelligence, and sophistication of the Byzantine court. Visitors left with the impression that they had witnessed something extraordinary. Meanwhile, inside the empire, daily life continued with quiet regularity. Markets opened each morning. Children studied their lessons. Farmers worked their fields. Monks prayed inside peaceful monasteries. Sailors navigated distant waters. Each person lived their own small story within the much larger history of the empire. And this history stretched across more than 1,000 years. Few civilizations in history lasted so long while maintaining such a strong cultural identity. The Byzantines preserved ancient knowledge. They protected trade routes connecting continents. They developed unique art, architecture, and traditions. And they carried the legacy of Rome into a new era. Tonight, as our slow journey continues, we have explored the complex systems that allowed the Byzantine Empire to function and survive through centuries of change. But many peaceful stories remain ahead. Stories of remarkable emperors, stories of scholars and inventors, stories of distant travelers who passed through the gates of Constantinople. So let your thoughts drift quietly along this calm river of history. And if this relaxing exploration of the Byzantine Empire is helping you unwind, remember to follow or subscribe so you can return for the next gentle chapter in our long journey through one of history's most fascinating civilizations. Before we continue our peaceful journey through the world of the Byzantine Empire, take another slow breath. Let the calm rhythm of the story settle around you like a quiet evening breeze. If these relaxing moments of history help you unwind, consider following or subscribing so you can return for the next chapters of this long and gentle exploration. Now, let us continue. As the centuries passed, the Byzantine Empire became a place where cultures met and blended together. Travelers arriving in Constantinople often noticed this immediately. The city felt both familiar and mysterious at the same time. Roman traditions still shaped many institutions, yet Greek language and culture filled the streets. Christian churches stood everywhere, but merchants from many different religions and backgrounds walked through the same markets. It was a crossroads of worlds, and nowhere was this diversity more visible than in the city's marketplaces. Imagine walking slowly through one of Constantinople's large bazaars during the middle of the day. Narrow streets were lined with wooden stalls and small shops. Overhead, cloth awnings stretched between buildings, creating cool, shaded paths beneath the bright Mediterranean sun. The air carried many different scents: fresh bread from nearby bakeries, spices such as cinnamon, pepper, and saffron, leather goods newly crafted by skilled artisans, perfumes made from rare flowers and oils. Traders called out to passing customers, proudly displaying their goods. Some sold brightly colored fabrics that flowed like water in the breeze. Others offered metal lamps, tools, and household items. Jewelry merchants carefully arranged rings, necklaces, and bracelets that sparkled in the light. But the markets were not only places for buying and selling. They were also social gathering places. People came to exchange news, discuss politics, tell stories, and meet friends. Street performers sometimes entertained the crowds with music or small performances. Children followed their parents through the busy streets, wide-eyed at the sights and sounds around them. Meanwhile, inside quieter neighborhoods of the city, everyday life moved at a slower pace. Homes in Constantinople varied greatly depending on wealth. Wealthy families often lived in spacious houses built from stone. These homes sometimes included inner courtyards filled with plants and fountains. Decorative mosaics covered floors, and colorful tapestries hung along the walls. Rooms were arranged around open spaces that allowed sunlight and fresh air to flow through the house. Servants worked in kitchens, gardens, and storage rooms, while the family gathered in larger halls for meals and conversations. In contrast, many ordinary citizens lived in smaller apartments or wooden houses built close together along narrow streets. These homes were simple but practical. Families shared living spaces where cooking, eating, and sleeping often took place in the same room. Clay stoves warmed the space during cooler seasons, while open windows allowed fresh air to circulate during warmer months. Even in modest homes, small decorations often appeared. Painted pottery, woven textiles, and religious icons hung on the walls. These icons held deep spiritual meaning and were often placed in quiet corners where family members could pray. Life inside these homes was centered around family and community. Parents taught children practical skills needed for adulthood. Boys might learn trades such as carpentry, metalwork, or sailing. Girls often learned household skills like weaving, cooking, and managing daily responsibilities. But education was not limited only to practical work. Some families encouraged their children to study literature, philosophy, and religion. Books were rare and valuable objects, but schools and teachers helped preserve knowledge across generations. The Byzantine Empire held great respect for learning. Libraries existed in both cities and monasteries, storing manuscripts carefully copied by scholars and monks. These collections contained works from ancient Greek philosophers, Roman historians, and early Christian writers. Many of these texts might have been lost forever if not for Byzantine scholars who preserved them. This quiet dedication to learning helped shape future generations across Europe and the Middle East. Meanwhile, outside the city, travelers continued to arrive from distant lands. Some came from Northern Europe. These visitors, sometimes known as Varangians, were tall warriors from regions that would later become Scandinavia and Russia. Many of them served in an elite military unit known as the Varangian Guard. The Varangian Guard became one of the most trusted forces protecting the Byzantine Emperor. These warriors were known for their strength, loyalty, and impressive axes carried into battle. Because they came from distant lands and had fewer connections. Within Byzantine politics, emperors believed they could rely on their loyalty. For centuries, members of the Varangian Guard stood watch inside the imperial palace. They guarded the emperor during ceremonies, traveled with him during important events, and protected the palace from potential threats. Their presence added another fascinating layer to the diverse population of Constantinople. Elsewhere in the empire, life followed its own quiet patterns. In mountain villages, shepherds guided flocks of sheep across grassy hillsides. In coastal towns, fishermen repaired nets while watching the tides. In monasteries, monks continued their prayers and studies in peaceful isolation. In small towns along trade roads, travelers rested before continuing long journeys across the empire. Each region had its own traditions, foods, dialects, and customs, yet all were connected through the shared structure of Byzantine society. Festivals and holidays brought communities together throughout the year. Religious celebrations filled streets with processions, music, and candlelight. Churches became gathering places where entire communities prayed, sang, and celebrated important events. Even simple village festivals created moments of joy. Musicians played instruments, dancers moved in circles, families shared meals outdoors under warm skies. These gatherings strengthened the bonds between neighbors and reminded people of their shared traditions. As night fell across the empire, villages and cities slowly grew quiet again. Oil lamps flickered inside homes. Stars appeared across the dark sky above fields, mountains, and seas. Somewhere in the distance, a traveler continued along a road lit only by moonlight. Somewhere else, a monk finished copying the final lines of a manuscript before gently closing the book. And within the walls of Constantinople, the great city rested briefly before another day of life began. Tonight, we have wandered through markets, homes, libraries, and quiet villages scattered across the Byzantine world. But many more calm stories still remain ahead. Stories of remarkable inventions, stories of unusual traditions, stories of emperors whose decisions shaped centuries of history. So allow your thoughts to drift peacefully through these echoes of the past. And if these relaxing stories about the Byzantine Empire are helping you unwind or fall asleep, remember to follow or subscribe so you can return for the next gentle chapter in our long journey through one of history's most fascinating civilizations. Before we continue our calm journey through the Byzantine Empire, take another slow breath. Let your mind settle as the story unfolds gently, one moment at a time. If you enjoy these relaxing explorations of history, consider following or subscribing so you can return for the next peaceful chapters of this long historical journey. Now, let us continue. Throughout its long history, the Byzantine Empire became known not only for its powerful cities and armies, but also for its remarkable art and architecture. Walking through a Byzantine city, especially Constantinople, a traveler would quickly notice the beauty of its buildings. Churches rose above neighborhoods with rounded domes that seemed to float gently in the sky. Their roofs were often covered with tiles that shimmered softly in the sunlight. Inside these churches, the atmosphere was calm and mysterious. Light from small windows filtered through the air and reflected off golden mosaics that covered the walls. Candles flickered quietly, and the scent of incense drifted slowly upward toward painted ceilings. The Byzantine style of architecture was unlike anything seen before. One of its most important features was the dome. Rather than using flat ceilings or simple roofs, Byzantine architects designed large circular domes that rested on curved structures known as pendentives. This clever engineering allowed massive domes to appear as though they were suspended in mid-air. The most famous example of this design was the Hagia Sophia in Constantinople. For centuries, travelers described entering the Hagia Sophia as a breathtaking experience. The enormous dome seemed to hover above the vast interior space. Sunlight poured through its windows, creating beams of light that moved slowly across the golden surfaces throughout the day. Many visitors believed they had stepped into a place that felt almost heavenly. But architecture was only one form of Byzantine creativity. Art flourished throughout the empire. Byzantine artists developed a unique style that focused on spiritual meaning rather than physical realism. Their figures were often calm, solemn, and filled with symbolic detail. Icons remained one of the most important forms of Byzantine art. These sacred images were painted on wooden panels using special techniques passed down through generations. Artists used natural pigments mixed with egg yolk to create a durable paint known as tempera. Gold leaf was often added behind the figures to represent divine light. For believers, icons were not simply paintings. They were sacred objects that helped people focus their prayers and connect with the spiritual world. Families often kept icons inside their homes, while churches displayed large collections along their walls. People sometimes lit candles in front of them or kissed the images during moments of devotion. But Byzantine art was not limited to religious themes. Craftsmen across the empire produced beautiful, everyday objects, jewelry made of gold and enamel, glass vessels in bright colors, textiles woven with complex patterns, metalwork decorated with animals, plants, and geometric designs. Many of these objects were traded across long distances, spreading Byzantine artistic influence throughout Europe and Asia. Visitors from other lands often admired the elegance and skill of Byzantine craftsmanship. At the same time, scholars and thinkers continued their quiet work of preserving knowledge. Byzantine education was deeply connected to the traditions of ancient Greece. Students studied grammar, rhetoric, philosophy, and mathematics. Teachers often used classical texts, that had been copied and preserved over centuries. The works of Homer, Aristotle, and Plato were still read and discussed in Byzantine schools. This dedication to learning helped maintain a connection between the ancient world and the medieval one. Byzantine scholars did not simply preserve old knowledge, they also added their own insights. Astronomy, medicine, engineering, and philosophy continued to develop slowly through careful study and observation. Doctors wrote medical guides describing symptoms and treatments for various illnesses. Historians recorded important events, giving future generations valuable descriptions of the empire's past. And philosophers explored questions about faith, ethics, and the nature of the universe. Meanwhile, life across the empire remained shaped by the changing seasons. In spring, farmers planted crops and orchards blossomed with flowers. In summer, warm sunlight filled vineyards and olive groves. In autumn, harvest festivals celebrated the gathering of food that would sustain communities through the winter. And in winter, snow sometimes covered mountain regions, while families gathered indoors beside warm fires. Each season brought its own rhythms and traditions. These cycles of nature were familiar to people across the Byzantine world, whether they lived in busy cities or quiet rural villages. Festivals marked the passage of time throughout the year. Religious holidays filled churches with music and candlelight. Choirs sang ancient hymns whose melodies echoed through stone halls. Processions moved through city streets, carrying icons and banners. In villages, families gathered for meals and celebrations that brought communities together. Music was also an important part of Byzantine culture. Church music developed into a distinctive style known today as Byzantine chant. These chants were slow, flowing melodies sung without instruments. The voices of singers rose and fell in patterns that created a peaceful and meditative atmosphere. In large churches, the sound of chanting could echo gently through the domes, filling the space with calm resonance. Outside religious settings, musicians also performed at festivals and social gatherings. Simple instruments such as flutes, lyres, and drums provided music for dancing and celebration. These joyful moments balanced the more serious routines of everyday life. As centuries passed, the Byzantine Empire continued evolving. Borders shifted, new leaders came to power, new challenges appeared. Yet many traditions remained remarkably stable. The capital city of Constantinople still stood proudly between two continents. Its walls still guarded its people, its churches still glowed with golden mosaics, and its scholars still preserved knowledge that would later shape the future of Europe and beyond. Tonight, we have wandered through the artistic and intellectual world of Byzantium, through glowing churches, quiet libraries, and workshops where skilled craftsmen shaped beautiful objects. But our gentle journey through this remarkable civilization is not yet complete. There are still many more peaceful stories waiting ahead, stories of travelers arriving from distant lands, stories of unusual inventions and surprising traditions, stories of the final centuries of an empire that endured for more than 1,000 years. So let your mind drift softly through these quiet moments of history. And if these relaxing stories about the Byzantine Empire are helping you unwind or fall asleep, remember to follow or subscribe so you can return for the next peaceful chapter our long journey through one of history's most enduring civilizations. Before we continue our quiet journey through the long history of the Byzantine Empire, take another slow breath. Let your thoughts settle and drift gently with the rhythm of the story. If these calm explorations of history help you relax or fall asleep, consider following or subscribing so you can return for the final chapter and future peaceful journeys through the past. Now, let us continue. As the centuries passed, the Byzantine Empire entered a period of gradual change. Empires, like living things, grow, adapt, and sometimes face moments of difficulty. For Byzantium, these changes came slowly across generations. Borders shifted, new enemies appeared, and the world around the empire transformed in unexpected ways. Yet, through much of this time, Constantinople remained one of the greatest cities on earth. Travelers approaching the city by sea still described the same breathtaking view. Tall stone walls stretched along the horizon. Church domes rose above crowded neighborhoods. Harbors were filled with ships from distant lands, and towering above everything stood the great Hagia Sophia, its massive dome shining in the sunlight. Inside the city, life continued with familiar rhythms. Markets opened each morning. Artisans worked in their shops. Scholars studied ancient texts. Monks prayed quietly in candlelit monasteries. For the people living there, daily life still felt stable and predictable. But beyond the walls, powerful new forces were beginning to reshape the world. In the eastern regions, the Seljuk Turks emerged as a new power. These skilled warriors gradually moved into territories that had once belonged to the Byzantine Empire. One of the most important moments in this struggle occurred in the year 1071. In that year, Byzantine forces faced the Seljuk Turks at a battle known as the Battle of Manzikert. The battle did not immediately destroy the empire, but it weakened Byzantine control over large areas of Anatolia. Over time, this region, once one of the empire's strongest and most prosperous areas, began to slip away. For the Byzantines, Anatolia had long been a vital source of soldiers, farmland, and resources. Losing control of these lands made the empire more vulnerable. Yet, even in difficult times, Byzantine leaders continued trying to restore stability. Some emperors worked hard to rebuild the army. Others strengthened alliances with neighboring kingdoms, and many focused on protecting the capital itself, knowing that Constantinople remained the heart of their civilization. During this period, the empire also experienced an unexpected and complicated relationship with Western Europe. For centuries, the Byzantine world and Western kingdoms had followed different historical paths. Their languages, religious traditions, and political systems had gradually become more distinct. yet they still shared a connection through Christianity. When Byzantine leaders faced increasing pressure from Eastern enemies, they sometimes sought help from Western rulers. This request eventually played a role in the beginning of the Crusades. The Crusades were a series of military campaigns launched by Western European forces traveling eastward toward the Holy Land. At first, Byzantine leaders hoped these armies might help push back the Seljuk Turks and restore lost territories. But the relationship between Byzantine authorities and the Crusaders was often complicated. Cultural misunderstandings, political tensions, and competing goals created difficulties. And then, during the early 1200s, something unexpected and tragic happened. Instead of continuing toward the Holy Land, a group of crusaders turned their attention toward Constantinople itself. In the year 1204, Crusader forces attacked and captured the city. This event became known as the Fourth Crusade. For the Byzantine Empire, it was a devastating moment. Parts of the city were damaged. Treasures, artworks, and sacred relics were taken. And for a time, the great capital fell under the control of foreign rulers. Yet, even this dramatic event did not completely end the Byzantine story. Byzantine leaders who had escaped the city established smaller successor states in other regions. Over the following decades, these groups slowly rebuilt their strength. And in the year 1261, Byzantine forces managed to recapture Constantinople and restore their rule. The empire continued, though now smaller and more fragile than before. Despite these challenges, Byzantine culture remained rich and vibrant. Artists continued creating icons and mosaics. Scholars continued copying manuscripts and preserving ancient knowledge. Churches remained filled with prayer, music, and candlelight. Even as political power declined, the cultural and spiritual traditions of Byzantium endured. Travelers still visited the city. Merchants still sailed into its harbors. Pilgrims still came to see its churches and holy relics. The city that had once been the center of a vast empire remained a place of beauty and history. But the world beyond its walls was changing rapidly. New powers were rising in nearby regions. Among them was a growing state in Anatolia led by the Ottoman Turks. Over time, this rising power expanded steadily, capturing more territory around the Byzantine capital. Gradually, the empire's borders shrank until Constantinople itself became surrounded by lands controlled by the Ottomans. The once vast Byzantine Empire had been reduced to only a small territory centered around the capital. Yet, even in its final centuries, the city remained remarkable. Its walls still stood strong. Its churches still glowed with golden mosaics. Its scholars still preserved ancient wisdom that would later help shape the Renaissance in Europe. Visitors who walked its streets could still sense the deep history surrounding them. Every stone seemed to hold memories of emperors, artists, scholars, and travelers who had lived there across 1,000 years. Tonight, we have wandered through the later centuries of the Byzantine world, where resilience and tradition carried the empire forward even through difficult times. But our journey is almost complete. In the next and final chapter, we will explore the last moments of the Byzantine Empire and the lasting legacy it left behind for the world. So allow your thoughts to drift gently as this quiet story continues. And if these relaxing moments of history are helping you rest, remember to follow or subscribe so you don't miss the final peaceful chapter of our long journey through the remarkable story of Byzantium. Before we begin the final chapter of our quiet journey through the Byzantine Empire, take one more slow breath. Let your body relax and allow the calm rhythm of the story to carry you gently toward rest. If you've enjoyed traveling through these peaceful moments of history, consider following or subscribing so you can return for more relaxing historical journeys in the future. Now, let us finish our story. For more than 1,000 years, the Byzantine Empire had stood as a bridge between worlds. It preserved the traditions of ancient Rome. It carried forward the knowledge of Greece. It became one of the great centers of Christian culture. And through centuries of war, trade, learning, and faith, it shaped the history of Europe, the Middle East, and beyond. But by the 1400s, the empire had become only a shadow of its former self. Once, Byzantine lands stretched across large parts of the Mediterranean. Powerful armies guarded distant provinces. Ships sailed under imperial banners across wide seas. Now, the empire had been reduced to a small territory centered around Constantinople and a few surrounding areas. Yet the city itself still remained magnificent. Travelers approaching its walls continued to marvel at the sight. The Theodosian walls, built centuries earlier, still rose high and strong. Towers stood along the massive defenses, watching over the land approaches to the city. Inside the walls, life continued much as it had for generations. Markets still opened in the mornings. Church bells still echoed through narrow streets. Scholars still studied ancient texts. And the great Hagia Sophia still stood at the heart of the city, its vast dome glowing softly in the light of candles and sunlight. But beyond the walls, a new and powerful empire was growing. The Ottoman Empire had expanded across Anatolia and the Balkans, gradually surrounding Constantinople on nearly every side. The Ottoman rulers understood the importance of the city. For centuries, Constantinople had been one of the most valuable prizes in the world. It controlled important trade routes. It connected Europe and Asia, and it carried immense historical and symbolic meaning. Finally, in the spring of the year 1453, the Ottoman Sultan Mehmed II launched a massive campaign to capture the city. An enormous army gathered outside the walls of Constantinople. Cannons were brought to the battlefield. Powerful new weapons capable of firing massive stone projectiles. These cannons represented a new era in warfare, one that even the famous Byzantine walls would struggle to resist. Inside the city, the defenders prepared as best they could. The Byzantine emperor at the time was Constantine XI Palaiologos. Though his resources were limited, he chose to stay and defend the city alongside his soldiers and citizens. Walls were reinforced, weapons prepared, and watchmen placed along the towers. The siege began. For weeks, Ottoman forces attacked the defenses while Byzantine defenders fought to protect their city. Cannons thundered against the walls, arrows and stones flew through the air, yet the defenders held out longer than many expected. The walls that had protected Constantinople for nearly 1,000 years resisted repeated assaults, but eventually the continuous bombardment weakened sections of the defenses. Then, in the early hours of May 29, 1453, a final assault began. Large Ottoman forces advanced toward the damaged walls. Defenders fought bravely, but the attackers eventually broke through. After more than 11 centuries of history, the Byzantine Empire came to an end. Constantinople was captured by the Ottoman forces. Yet, even in this moment of change, the city itself did not disappear. Instead, it entered a new chapter of its long story. Under Ottoman rule, Constantinople gradually became known as Istanbul. The city remained an important center of culture, trade, and religion. Many Byzantine buildings continued to stand. The Hagia Sophia was transformed into a mosque, but remained one of the most magnificent structures in the world. Markets continued to operate, ships continued to arrive in the harbor, and life continued within the same ancient streets. But the legacy of the Byzantine Empire did not fade away. In fact, its influence quietly spread across the world in many important ways. One of the most important contributions of Byzantium was the preservation of ancient knowledge. For centuries, Byzantine scholars had carefully copied and protected manuscripts from ancient Greece and Rome. When the empire declined, many of these scholars traveled westward into Europe. They carried with them precious books and knowledge. These texts helped inspire the Renaissance, a period of renewed interest in classical learning that transformed art, science, and philosophy across Europe. In this way, the intellectual heritage of Byzantium continued shaping the future long after the empire itself had ended. Byzantine art and architecture also left lasting influences. The distinctive domes of Byzantine churches inspired later architectural designs across Eastern Europe and Russia. Orthodox Christian traditions that developed in Byzantium spread into many regions, shaping cultures and religious practices that continue today. Even the legal and administrative traditions of the empire influenced later governments. The Byzantine world had quietly carried forward the legacy of Rome while creating something unique and lasting. Tonight, we have traveled slowly across more than 1,000 years of history. We have walked through the markets of Constantinople. We have stood beneath the golden dome of Hagia Sophia. We have visited quiet monasteries, peaceful villages, and bustling harbors filled with ships from distant lands. We have listened to the stories of emperors, scholars, soldiers, and ordinary people whose lives shaped one of history's most enduring civilizations. The Byzantine Empire may have faded from the political map long ago, but its legacy still surrounds us in architecture, in art, in law, in religion, and in the preserved knowledge that helped guide the world into new eras of discovery. Now, as our peaceful journey comes to its end, allow the quiet echoes of this long history to fade gently into the background. Let the ancient city of Constantinople rest beneath the soft glow of starlight over the Bosporus. And if you've enjoyed this relaxing journey through the Byzantine Empire, remember to follow or subscribe so you can return for more calm historical stories designed to help you unwind, relax, and drift peacefully into sleep. Good night, and until our next journey through history.